Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a truly fascinating journey to explore the whole concept of characteristics. Think of characteristics as the fundamental blueprints, those distinguishing features that define absolutely everything around us. If you want to truly understand how our universe is structured, and we're talking everything from microscopic atoms to grand cathedrals, or from the intricate coding of our DNA to the dynamics of high-performing teams, you absolutely have to look at these underlying blueprints. So we're going to zoom out step by step and examine these blueprints across 5 completely different domains to see how they shape and define our reality.
Okay, let's dive into this outline. Today we're hitting 5 distinct scales of existence. 1. The blueprint of matter. 2. The code of life. 3. The structure of personality. 4. The dynamics of teams. And 5. The pillars of design.
Let's begin right at the most elemental level. Section 1. The blueprint of matter.
At the basic chemical and physical level, a characteristic property is what actually helps us identify and classify a substance. And here is the really fascinating part about this foundational blueprint. It remains absolutely identical regardless of the sample size. Think about it. If you're looking at the characteristic property of color, 1 single gram of lead is the exact same color as 100 tons of lead. The size or the shape of the sample doesn't alter its defining blueprint one bit.
So the crucial point is how we actually use these blueprints in the real world to separate and identify unknown substances. Characteristic properties, things like melting point, boiling point, density, and solubility, are entirely unique to a given substance. This makes them incredibly useful. For instance, in a process called fractional distillation, scientists can separate mixed liquids simply by relying on their unique boiling points. On the flip side, non-characteristic properties, like mass and volume, well, they change depending on how much of the substance you have, meaning they can't uniquely identify it.
Before we leave the physical realm, it's worth noting how philosophers categorize these features to fully explain the nature of things. They actually break them down even further. An intrinsic property is one an object has completely independent of its context, like its physical mass. An extrinsic property, however, depends entirely on external relationships. Weight is a great example here, since it changes depending on gravity. Philosophers also distinguish between essential properties, those required for a thing to actually exist as what it is, and accidental properties. Like, as humans, we have the ability to laugh, but laughing isn't strictly an essential requirement for being human.
Let's move on and see how this builds as we step into the biological world. Section 2. The code of life. When we look at genetics, the blueprint becomes incredibly sophisticated. Here, we really need to understand the difference between a character and a trait. A character is an inherited, distinguishing feature that appears across a whole group of organisms. A trait, however, is a unique variation, a highly specific condition or state of that character. Think of a character as the overarching category, and the trait as the specific setting applied to that category.
So characters are controlled by the genes you inherit. Eye color is a character. But a trait is regulated by both inheritance and the environment, and they occur in the genome in pairs, where one might be dominant and the other recessive. So while eye color is the broad character, having specifically blue eyes, that is the trait.
Now let's look at how a collection of these characteristics can define an entire class of animals. There are 5 specific biological criteria that define a mammal. First, they're covered in hair or fur. Second, they're warm-blooded, meaning they maintain a constant internal temperature. Third, they give live birth, with young developing in a uterus, though, get this, that gestation period actually varies wildly. We're talking anywhere from just 13 days in a Virginia opossum to 210 days in a white-tailed deer. Wild, right? Fourth, the young are fed milk produced by mammary glands. And fifth, mammals boast a larger, more complex brain than other animal groups.
And this brilliantly illustrates our point. The eastern gray squirrel isn't just a familiar backyard visitor. It is a textbook representation of the mammalian blueprint, perfectly possessing all 5 of those defining characteristics we just covered.
All right, let's zoom out from basic biology to the complex human mind. Section 3. The structure of personality. Just as matter has physical properties, human personality actually has a psychological blueprint. The most widely supported model for this is the Big Five, derived using factor analysis and the lexical hypothesis, which essentially just looks at how we use everyday language to describe people. This model proposes a hierarchy of human psychological characteristics divided into 5 massive domains.
Now what's really interesting here is how beautifully ordered this psychological blueprint is. Each of the 5 broad domains breaks down neatly into precisely 2 distinct aspects, each with their own biological correlates. For example, Agreeableness splits perfectly into compassion and politeness. Conscientiousness breaks down into industriousness and orderliness. It reveals that our personality traits aren't just random quirks, they are deeply structured hierarchical systems.
We can even zoom out further on human personality. Researcher John Digman discovered superordinate factors. Basically, these are higher-order meta-traits that combine the Big Five into even broader personality blueprints. He called them alpha and beta. Alpha combines agreeableness, conscientiousness, and emotional stability. Beta combines extroversion and intellect or openness. It just goes to show us that our characteristics can be clustered together to define even larger patterns of human behavior.
Now let's explore what happens when we group those individuals together. Section 4. The dynamics of teams. When you put humans together, the group inevitably develops its own characteristic properties. High-performing teams, whether we're talking about an emergency response unit dealing with life-and-death scenarios or creative powerhouses like Pixar, they don't just happen by accident. They're built with intense intention and they share universal traits. They possess crystal-clear roles and responsibilities, so everyone knows exactly how they connect to the bigger picture. They rely on strong leadership that doesn't micromanage, but instead removes barriers. And they heavily utilize the recognition of success, which basically acts as the fuel to renew the team's energy and build collective trust during really difficult projects. But another absolute defining characteristic of these elite groups is flexibility. As the research notes, teams that can adapt quickly without losing focus are the ones that sustain performance. No matter how strong a plan is, circumstances change. Markets shift. A high-performing team is characterized by its adaptability. They revise their targets to reflect shifting circumstances, allowing them to pivot under immense pressure while keeping their focus laser-sharp on the ultimate objective.
Taking the final step in our zoom-out journey today. Section 5. The Pillars of Design.
Architecture, much like a chemical substance or a living organism, can be identified by its own characteristic properties. Let's look at Gothic architecture. Emerging in France in the 12th century, specifically around 1140 CE, with the new choir at St. Denis, this style completely transformed the medieval landscape. It was a massive movement of ingenuity designed to completely transcend the heaviness of earlier Romanesque buildings. It was all about seeking to inspire awe and spiritual elevation. You can identify a Gothic cathedral instantly by 3 key architectural characteristics. First up, verticality. Long, slender columns and elongated arches are deliberately designed to draw your eyes upward. Second, lightness. Broad, heavy walls are replaced with plentiful, beautiful stained glass, filling the whole space with brilliant colors. And third, weightlessness. Unlike those solid, earthbound Romanesque structures, Gothic architecture utilizes incredibly thin piers to support soaring vaults. It makes these massive stone buildings appear as light as a feather, almost like they're staying up by pure magic.
And that brings our journey to a close. We've seen how characteristics act as the definitive blueprint of reality, identifying matter, structuring life, categorizing the complex human mind, fueling high-performing teams, and holding up our most magnificent monuments. Identifying these properties is exactly how we make sense of our incredibly complex world. So as you reflect on all these universal blueprints, what characteristics, what traits will define your legacy? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.